Thank you for joining me today for Passion Week with Pastor. It's Friday, and I have enjoyed being with you every day this week, and of course I'll be with you tomorrow and then for our service on Sunday. What happened on Friday during Passion Week? The real question might be, what didn't happen? Think back for just a moment. Think back to the worst day you ever had and multiply it 1,000 times. And I don't think it would compare to the day or the couple of days that Jesus Christ had. And of course, Friday being the worst of all of them. In fact, Friday was such a sad day in history. Let's begin first with the arrest in the garden that probably took place after midnight or sometime in the morning. It says in Matthew chapter 26, verse number 47, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priest and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and says, "Greetings, Rabbi." And he kissed him, and Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you have come to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him, and behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so?" And in this particular one in Matthew, it doesn't tell you that when the Malchus's ear was cut off in the garden, the servant of the high priest, that Jesus healed him and put the ear back on. At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out against us as a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I have sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this is taking place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled. Think about that moment. Think about being deserted at the worst time, at a horrible time when you're being betrayed and arrested, by being deserted by those that are closest to you. From there, Jesus, that early that morning or after midnight, began to face several trials, starting with the Jewish trials, but where he went before Annas. And after he was tried there, Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. And as he stood before Caiaphas, here's what's kind of happening behind the scenes. Peter, his disciple, the Bible says, is following from a distance. Have you ever followed Jesus from a distance? I think we've all been guilty of that at some time in our life. But when Jesus needed a friend, his friends were nowhere to be found, most of them. But even Peter, who was one of his closest disciples, was following afar off. Also, the Bible says that Peter was sitting with the soldiers and warming himself at the fire. The chief priest and the council seeking testimony against Jesus. They were trying to find people to come in, and they had made up accusations and bring accusations against him. But the Bible says they found none. They accused him in the end, though, of blasphemy, and condemned him right there, and spat on him and hit him and beat him with their fist. While this is going on and Jesus is being ridiculed and Jesus is being tortured, something else is taking place, and that is Peter begins to deny Jesus. It says in Matthew chapter 26, verse 69, "Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, 'You also were with Jesus the Galilean.' But he denied it before them all, saying, 'I do not know what you mean.' And when he went out the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And he again denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly, you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear and say, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And what a sad moment. The Bible says that Peter went out and he wept bitterly. And then phase 3 of Jesus with the Jewish leaders and religious leaders and their trial before the Sanhedrin. In Matthew 27 verse 1 says, "When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor." Now let me back up to Judas for just a moment. Remember, I told you that Judas would regret what he had done. I want you to look with me in Matthew chapter 27 verse 3. "Then when Judas his betrayer saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest and elders, saying, 'I have sinned by betraying innocent blood.' They said, 'What is it to us? See to it yourself.' And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself." How sad. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them in the treasury, since it is blood money." And they actually took that money and purchased what is known as the potter's field. And Judas was buried there, and to this day it's known as that, and how sad it is. Moving on, phase 1 of Jesus' Roman trial, his first appearance before Pontius Pilate. In Matthew 27 it says, "Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And Jesus said, 'You have said so.' But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, 'Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?' But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed." Then they went on to phase 2 of the Roman trial, and he appears before Herod Antipas. And when Herod Antipas gets through with him, he sends him back to Pilate. And we see here in Matthew 27 verse 15, that's where he is at. And listen to what it says. "Now at the feast of the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas, a bad guy, a no good guy. He was no good for society. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, 'Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?' For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him." You see, his wife had had a dream from the Lord that night that really frightened her and really scared her concerning Jesus of Nazareth. She said to him, "Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priest and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And the governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, or they cried, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, what shall I do, he said, "with Jesus the Christ?" And they all said, and they all cried, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." Now, Pilate was a crowd pleaser. He wanted to make everybody happy, and he wanted to keep the kingdom happy. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water, and he washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And all the people answered, His blood be upon us and on our children. Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. You see, when he was sentenced, the Roman soldiers took him and they tied him to a whooping post. And they beat him 39 stripes with the cat of nine tails. The Bible says to within one stripe of his life being taken. Jesus received those stripes, and the word, it tells us that we are healed. And I'm thankful for that today. I'm thankful for what Jesus did for you and I. So now Jesus has been sentenced to die of crucifixion. Go with me to Matthew chapter 27. It's 9 a.m. in the morning. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped Jesus and put a scarlet robe on him. And twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and they put a reed in his hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. But what they didn't know is he really was the King of the Jews. And they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify. And as they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among themselves, casting lots. And they sat down and they kept watch over him there. And over his head they had put the charge against him, which read, This is Jesus, King of the Jews. The religious leaders were upset about that because they wanted the Roman soldiers to write, He said he was Jesus, King of the Jews. But they got it right when they wrote it. Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right hand and the other on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, He saved others, himself he cannot save. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, I am the Son of God. And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, This man is calling Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. But the others said, Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the earth shook, and the rocks split, and the tombs were all open. And many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, Truly, this was the Son of God. Around noon, while Jesus was on the cross, the Bible says that total darkness surrounded the area until about 3 p.m. when he cried, "It is finished," and he died on the cross. Jesus is dead. The disciples and the followers have scattered like sheep having no shepherd. It's over. It appears the enemy has won. But we'll just have to wait and see about that. I want to challenge you to study the events that took place on Thursday night and through the early morning hours of Friday, and then on Friday in the crucifixion study. It will be a blessing to you. There's no way I can cover it in these short videos that we're having each and every day. I want to tell you it will help you understand more what Jesus really did for us. Do you realize that he went through those horrible trials? He faced the desertion of his followers. He endured the crucifixion, the beautiful words that he spoke on the cross. Let me tell you, there's a lot there that you need to get in and begin to unwrap. I appreciate you, and I just want to tell you, I'll see you tomorrow morning on Saturday when we continue to talk about the Passion Week, the Holy Week. God bless you. I love you. Have a great day.